Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own family? You're still their child, but no longer a priority. You're still there, but no one really sees you. And then one day, when something good finally happens in your life, they show up again, like they never left. Today's story isn't just about a wedding, it's about a missing invitation. A son who was quietly erased from his mother's heart the moment she remarried. And a mother who suddenly wants to stand front and center for a moment she never earned. "I'm your mother," she says. "I deserve to be there." But does giving birth automatically entitle someone to presence at your milestones when they've been absent from your pain? This is a daily story, but for many, it could be the echo of real life. A story about broken bonds, the courage to draw boundaries, and the hard truth that family is not just about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters. He was just 8 years old when his world quietly fell apart. One morning, his father was there, flipping pancakes, humming out of tune to Saturday cartoons. The next, his parents were signing papers, dividing weekends like property, and explaining things with soft voices and forced smiles. Divorce doesn't come with a warning label for children. It comes with silence, with new rules, with a suitcase by the door and hugs that feel final. Still, he held on. Kids always do. They believe in second chances, in reunions, in the idea that love, even when broken, somehow finds its way back home. But then came Dave. Dave with his button-up shirts and perfect posture. And Dave's 2 kids, loud, energetic, always shining. They moved in like a new movie was starting, and he was just a background character in a film that used to be about him. At first, he tried to be part of it. He smiled at the right moments. He asked if he could come along to the water park trip. She said, "Maybe next time." There was never a next time. Then came the first game she didn't show up to, the school project she forgot to ask about, the birthday she said she'd plan after things settled. He began to understand. He was not the center anymore, not the priority, not even a part of her plans. She laughed more with Dave's kids. She cheered louder. She posted pictures of their vacations online, calling them her beautiful blended family. And all the while, her son sat quietly in his room, wondering, what did I do wrong? Was I too much or not enough? He stopped asking after a while. He learned to mute himself. Because every time he reached out, every time he tried to reclaim a little space in her heart, he was met with indifference, a distracted nod, a glance at her phone. And that hurts more than yelling ever could. Because a child doesn't just want attention. They crave recognition. They want to be chosen, wanted, loved on purpose, but he wasn't. He watched her light up at every game Dave's kids played. He heard her tell them, "I'm proud of you," and realized she hadn't said that to him in years, so he did what hurt the least. He faded into the background she left him in. By the time he turned 18, he didn't run, he didn't rebel, he just left. Quietly. Like someone who understood his absence wouldn't really be noticed. There was a small hope, buried deep, that maybe she'd call, that she'd notice the empty chair at the table, that she'd reach out and say, "I miss you. I'm sorry." But all he got were delayed replies, or none at all. "Sorry with Dave and the boys. We're out of town, busy this week. Maybe next time." It was always next time, but next time never came. And somewhere in the silence, the boy in him stopped waiting. But the ache stayed. Because the deepest pain isn't hatred. It's being forgotten by someone you never stopped loving. And the cruelest kind of loneliness is when you're right there in the room and the one person who should see you simply doesn't. So when she texted years later, out of nowhere, saying she was so excited for the wedding, saying how proud she was and how she couldn't wait to watch him start this new chapter, all he could feel was grief. Not the loud, crashing kind, but the quiet, hollow ache of someone who had finally stopped hoping. Because now, after years of absence, she wanted to show up, front row, smiling, dressed in motherly pride, as if she'd never left, as if her silence hadn't already spoken loud enough. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon, just a casual buzz on his phone, nothing dramatic. But as soon as he saw the name, his stomach dropped. Mom. It had been months, maybe longer, the kind of silence that no longer surprised him. Hey, sweetheart. Just heard the news. I'm so happy for you and Sarah. Can't wait to hear all the wedding details. I'm so proud of you. This is such a beautiful new chapter. He stared at the words, letting them sit there like strangers in his inbox. There was no anger at first, just confusion. Then something colder, something heavier. Where was this pride when he graduated high school alone? Where was this excitement when he struggled through college without so much as a, "How are you doing?" Where was this mother when birthdays passed with no call, no card, no sign that he still mattered? And now that there was something to celebrate, something she could be seen attending, now she wanted in. He didn't answer right away. He closed his phone, took a breath, but it gnawed at him. It wasn't just her sudden reappearance. It was the tone, the assumption, the way she wrote as if there had never been distance, as if their bond had been quietly waiting in the background, untouched by years of silence and absence. As if he was the one who had simply forgotten to invite her back in. So when he finally replied, he chose his words carefully. Hey, I appreciate the message, but I want to be honest. I'm not comfortable having you at the wedding. We haven't had a relationship in a long time. If you're truly interested in reconnecting, we can talk after the wedding, but not before. He hit send. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of finally speaking a truth he had carried for far too long. Minutes later, the reply came. What? Are you serious? I'm your mother. I deserve to be there. Don't hold a grudge. This is about love and family. You're being unfair. There it was. The guilt. The script. The assumption that motherhood, no matter how absent, still granted her front row access to his most sacred moments. But this time, he didn't bend, because he wasn't that invisible little boy anymore, hoping for scraps of attention. He was a man now, a man building a future, a man who had learned that love without presence is just performance. She had chosen her absence again and again. Now he was choosing his peace. And if that meant drawing a line, even one that hurt, then so be it. Because sometimes, healing isn't quiet. Sometimes it requires confrontation, not with rage, but with truth. And the truth was simple. You can't walk back into someone's life at the finish line when you never showed up for the race. At first, it was just her. The text, the disbelief, the tears she tried to weaponize through words. I'm your mother. This is cruel. You're being cold. But when he didn't back down, she didn't stay alone. It started with an aunt, a woman who hadn't spoken to him in years, suddenly calling with concern in her voice and judgment just beneath it. Look, I know things weren't perfect, but she's still your mom. This is her only son's wedding. You can't just shut her out. He said thank you. He said he'd think about it. But deep down, he already knew. This wasn't about one day. It was about every day that came before it. Then came the cousin who posted a vague status on Facebook. Something about how people love holding on to old pain like it's a badge. Others chimed in, not naming him directly, but making it clear. They thought he was heartless. And suddenly, it wasn't just silence he was dealing with. It was noise. Loud, chaotic, pointed noise. Everyone had an opinion. Some reached out quietly, saying, I understand. I support you. But more often they said, this is just one day. Be the bigger person. You'll regret this later. As if his boundary was an act of revenge, as if protecting himself was an act of war. He started to feel the pressure in his chest, tight, constant, because now the wedding wasn't just about him and Sarah. It had become a battleground for a family that had never been whole. His mother escalated. She texted Sarah directly. "Please talk to him. He won't listen to me. He's not thinking clearly. This day is important to me too. I've waited for this moment as his mother." Sarah showed him the messages, her face calm but eyes searching his. He didn't get angry. He just sat there, quietly, and said, "She waited for this moment, but not for me." And that's when he realized the hurt wasn't just coming from what she did, it was coming from what the rest of the family refused to see. They saw a wedding invite as a right. He saw it as a seat earned. They wanted harmony. He needed honesty. And the cost of pretending was too high. So he responded to no one. Not anymore. He turned off notifications. He muted the group chat. Because in the middle of all the noise, one truth rang louder than the rest. You don't owe people a front row seat in your life just because they demand one, especially when they chose not to show up when it truly mattered. There was still time before the wedding. Still room for second thoughts. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't questioning himself. He was choosing peace, even if it came with backlash, even if it came with silence. Because sometimes, standing your ground doesn't feel like winning. It feels like grieving the version of love you always wished you had, but finally stopped waiting for. When he sent the message, there was a strange calm in his chest. He had read it over a dozen times, changed a few words, softened the language, not because he doubted what he felt, but because part of him still wanted to be kind. "I'm not comfortable with you coming to the wedding. We haven't had a relationship for years. If you want to rebuild something real, I'm open to that, after the wedding. But not now. Not this way." He hit send. And for the first time in a long time, he spoke from a place that didn't tremble. But the calm didn't last. A few hours later, her name lit up his screen again, this time with a flood of messages. And then, a call. He almost didn't answer. But something in him needed to hear it, needed to know if she would finally speak to him as a mother, not as someone demanding a role she hadn't earned. The moment he said hello, he heard it. The crying. Not quiet, not restrained. It was the loud kind, the kind meant to be heard. "How could you do this to me? I'm your mother. Do you know how that sounds? You're not comfortable with me, like I'm a stranger?" He didn't interrupt. He just listened, like he used to as a child, when her emotions always took up all the space in the room. "I made mistakes, yes, but I'm still your mother." "You're punishing me. For what? For being human?" Her voice cracked. She was sobbing now. "You're holding a grudge. That's what this is. You're throwing away your own mother because of the past." And that was the moment something shifted. Because for years he had swallowed guilt like it was medicine. He had convinced himself that maybe he was too sensitive, that maybe expecting love and attention from a parent was asking too much. But not anymore. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and when he spoke, it was quiet but steady. "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." Silence. Then the tears returned. "I don't understand how you can be so cold, so unforgiving. This is the most important day of your life, and I'm not allowed to be there." He wanted to say, "Where were you on all the other important days?" But he didn't. Because if she didn't see it now, she never would. Instead, he let her cry. Let her rage. Let her try to rewrite the story in real time, casting herself as the wounded mother and him as the ungrateful son. But this time, he didn't play along. Because grief wears many masks, and one of the cruelest is guilt disguised as love. She had made her choices. She had prioritized her comfort, her new family, her silence. And now, When it was inconvenient to be left out, she remembered how to cry. But he remembered how to choose himself. And for the first time, he didn't feel guilty for doing it. He felt free. The next wave didn't come from her. It came from them, the family. The aunts and uncles and cousins who had been largely absent until now, until there was drama to dissect and a wedding invitation at stake. Some called quietly, in private, with soft voices and careful words. "I just want to understand, that's all." "You really don't want her there? Not even for 5 minutes?" Others weren't so gentle. "You're being dramatic. She's still your mother. You'll regret this one day." It was like standing in the middle of a room filled with echoes, each one pulling him in a different direction, each one demanding he bend, just a little. "It's just one day," they said. "Why cause more tension? You're making this harder than it needs to be." But what none of them seemed to understand was that it hadn't been just one day for him. It had been every day, every birthday she missed, every report card no one asked about, every holiday he spent pretending he was okay with being forgotten. They talked about the wedding like it was a performance, like forgiveness was a script, and he just needed to read his lines for the sake of family unity. But he wasn't acting. He was healing. And healing doesn't always look polite. Some members of the family surprised him. A cousin he hadn't spoken to in years sent him a quiet message late at night. "You don't owe her this. I saw what you went through. You're doing the right thing." Another, his aunt on his dad's side, called just to say, "I'm proud of you. You're breaking a cycle. That takes courage." Those words stayed with him longer than the criticism, because in the whirlwind of guilt and pressure, those were the voices that reminded him. He wasn't cruel. He was just tired of being hurt. But still, it stung. It stung to know that some people would only measure his heart by how much he was willing to swallow. That love to them meant bending until you broke. That peace meant silence. That forgiveness meant pretending. He didn't want to burn bridges. He just didn't want to keep crossing ones that only led back to pain. So he stopped explaining, stopped defending, not out of spite, but out of clarity. Because if someone couldn't see the difference between protection and punishment, they were never going to understand the wound to begin with. In the end, the family wasn't fully against him, but it wasn't fully with him either. And that was okay. Because for the first time, he was choosing something that didn't need unanimous approval. He was choosing himself. In the quiet moments when the voices had faded and the phone had stopped buzzing, the question lingered. Am I wrong for this? Not because he doubted his decision, but because, like most people raised to be kind, he was taught that forgiveness is the highest virtue, and that family, no matter how flawed, should always be let in. But what no one tells you is this. Sometimes, letting someone in also means letting the pain back in. And not everyone deserves a second chance at your most sacred moments, especially when they were never there for the quiet, ordinary ones. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about honoring the years he had spent hurting in silence and choosing not to silence himself anymore. Because he knew this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about reclaiming something far more personal, his right to decide who gets to witness his joy. People said, it's just one day. But it wasn't. It was the culmination of every day she hadn't shown up. Every time he needed a mother and got nothing but a voicemail. Every time he hoped, and she didn't call back. Letting her come now would have been easy, for her. But for him, it would have been another way of erasing his own pain. And this time, he refused to do that. Because healing isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it looks like confrontation. Sometimes it means saying no, even when it breaks your own heart a little. And so he stood firm, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. And the lesson was this: you can love someone and still not let them hurt you again. You can grieve what never was and still choose joy for what is. The wedding came, and no, she wasn't there. But the people who mattered were. Not perfect people, not people who had never made mistakes, but people who had shown up, consistently, gently, with love. And as he stood at the altar, hand in hand with Sarah, he felt something lift. Not closure, but peace. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel guilty for choosing himself. He felt whole. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it simply means letting go without letting them back in. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not dramatic, not loud, just quietly choosing peace, even when no one claps for. Sometimes choosing peace means letting go of people we once waited our whole lives for. Not out of hate, not out of revenge, but because we finally learned love isn't proven by blood. It's proven by presence. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose yourself over keeping the peace? Share your story in the comments, because your truth might help someone else find theirs.